God fucking damn it.
Okay.
You sound like a Muppet.
We got the joke a lot. We're taking a second run at this, having done the first run, and then all of us were in various horrible moods because we recorded it the day that the Roe verdict came out, and so now we're taking a second run at this. But unfortunately, Justin has caught plague.
Yeah.
Is the thing.
I'm recovering from the novel coronavirus.
You sound like you're recovering real good.
It gave you Muppet voice. I'm sorry to tell you this.
Muppet voice.
As I just said, I assume this is what Jordan Peterson sounded like the day he woke up from his Russian medically induced coma.
I hope you get better soon. You are my best friend.
Yes, you're a dear friend.
I have all the love for you in the world, but I also hope that this permanently changes your voice, that you always sound like this.
I gotta say, I feel much better today than I have any day in the past 2 weeks. But I sound terrible.
Yeah. I have missed recording with you guys is the thing. It's genuinely very enjoyable, and I've missed doing it. So it's not just the listeners, but this is sort of. Technically, this is a bonus episode that we're releasing for free because everyone's been very patient with all of us dying of various causes.
Yes,
you know who all of us are, but we also have a guest. Hello, guest.
I go by Komodo Dad or KD, but most people on Twitter are going to know me as Wartakes. I am a NatSec shill, and my pronouns are he/him.
Thank you for coming. We've got you on for a second time to take a second run at the story of this man in tiny shorts. This is the story of those shorts and the story of one of the last and hardest anti-colonial struggles and how it came to devour its own heroes, and also the story of a doomed white supremacist last hurrah that still resonates with racists to this day. We're talking about
They love it.
They love it. We're talking about Rhodesia. Next slide, please.
Boo!
A country
that's a lot of
with
hideous ass flags.
Oh yeah,
except for the one on the bottom center is pretty good.
Yeah,
that's a pretty good one.
This is my theory of you can judge how quote unquote normal a country is by how many flags it has had over the course of its existence. And as you can see, Rhodesia is a very normal, or Zimbabwe rather now is a very normal country.
Absolutely. We start with the colonial thing, and we end up with our modern country of Zimbabwe, which I guess we can start with some ancient history, right? And we can explain what Zimbabwe is geographically and where it is, and when human civilization started there. So next slide, please.
Okay, I'll bite. What's a Zimbabwe?
It's a ziggurat of some kind.
Sort of. Zimbabwe means like walled stone house, or if you want to have
that's whatever, man.
Yeah, if you want a loose translation, castle works. That's a Zimbabwe. There's like thousands of these across the country. This is the biggest one. It's called Great Zimbabwe.
I recognize from Civ 3.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm an ignorant man.
So if you imagine Africa, right? This is directly north of South Africa. We're in the central bit of the sort of southern part of Africa, and there. So it's got South Africa to the south. It's got the Portuguese colonies and former colonies of Mozambique to its east, and it's like.
Got Botswana.
Yes, yeah.
Botswana's dope as hell.
I should have put up a map.
lovely place.
It's landlocked, right?
Yes.
Okay.
It's so funny when your voice goes back to its normal range. So it's landlocked, right? And I'm just like, oh, my little Muppet pal.
Also, I think I fixed my
yes, you
my
did.
levels.
Thank God.
Excellent.
Terrific.
I had to poke around in my Logitech bullshit, but
do you have
we're good
G-Hub?
now. I do, in fact, because I am a capital G gamer.
Yeah, I'm also rocking the Logitech headset. I probably sound like shit, but that's everybody else's problem.
That's right.
Hell yeah, brother.
You just get very crisp Alice in the meantime.
I just want to. I have thought about it out of an act of pure rage, simply going back to the old mic and pretending like nothing is wrong.
You should not do that.
I have been around listening to this pod long enough that I can remember OG Liam Mike, and those were the days.
Yeah,
those are the
days.
Real heads now.
I'm thinking I might start calling in from like a Motorola walkie-talkie and just be like, "Hey guys,
many moons ago when these old oaks were young."
Alice is calling
the San people.
Alice is calling in on a Motorola brick phone that she will then use to detonate an improvised explosive device somewhere in Afghanistan.
That's right. I got all these containers of yellow palm oil, and I'm just going to stack them all up on the roadside and see what happens.
I actually called into the podcast using oral tradition.
That was my stripper name in high school. Not high school, college. My bad.
Cancelled.
Well, I'm the stripper. I'm the one getting exploited, certainly.
Oh, so you want to deny yourself your own agency there? Interesting.
Look, I'm not saying it's my logic. I'm saying that's Twitter logic. That's what would happen.
So Zimbabwe,
problematic. Yeah, we fucking know, bud.
So human civilization in Zimbabwe began with the San people who built these Zimbabwe's. They built these. This is a little soapstone carving of a Zimbabwe bird. We're not sure what type of bird it is. It has like a ritual purpose. It's on the flag of modern Zimbabwe. The San people sort of then become succeeded by Shona people, and then you have a second ethnic group that comes north into Zimbabwe, the Ndebele, who this happens after Shaka Zulu. After he dies, one of his generals revolts in 1821. It sets off a process called the Fekane. A bunch of people who used to be Zulu soldiers come north and settle. They're called the Ndebele or the Matabele. And they engage in sort of like on and off ethnic wars between the Shona and the Ndebele for years until in comes next slide, please.
Next one.
This motherfucker.
This motherfucker right here.
Yeah.
Of all of our motherfuckers, perhaps the most venal.
You're allowed to throw tomatoes at these statues. You can do that.
Yeah.
Or whatever was that that woman posted.
Yeah.
Don't like a statue, you could simply get rid of it.
That's right. So you see this the strategic position of the British Empire in Africa sort of, except that there's no good links other than by ocean. Has a lot of territories in North Africa, has a lot of colonies in South Africa, and no real way of linking them other than by ship. What Cecil Rhodes wants to do is to build a telegraph line. You can see there's a telegraph cable that he's holding, and a railway that goes from Cape Town to Cairo. And that way you can just run the whole empire through this like central artery.
I stand by my.
Consider that he'd have to keep standing there with it.
Yeah, the whole time.
Well, he was 800 feet tall.
Some Victorian era dude saw this and thought, I am oddly titillated by this picture, and I can't quite figure out why.
The damnable erections back again.
Yeah, the white man's boner.
Yeah.
I think part of it is also that, like, I am in favor of building the Cape to Cairo Railroad, but only as a tourist narrow gauge railroad.
Yes, I was about to say, building a Cape to Cairo Railroad for imperialism, bad. Building a Cape to Cairo Railroad because it would be fucking cool, good.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you'd presumably want something that actually can move stuff and benefit people economically.
As a public works project, it's not a bad idea inherently. Anyway,
but when he's doing it, it sucks.
Yeah. So if
you look at
anti-Semitism,
when I'm doing it, it's fine.
so if you look at Cecil Rhodes's foremost boot, he has his foot on South Africa.
That's a good metaphor.
Yeah, exactly. Immediately above that is Rhodesia. To its east, you have Portuguese colonies, which they're kind of sort of indifferent about. To its north, you have the the Congo, specifically Leopold II, King of the Belgians, personal, extremely evil
ghost.
personal fiefdom, and its southern province, Katanga.
I once got booted from a CSGO match because I wouldn't stop taunting our Portuguese teammates about how they lost Angola.
Good.
Good.
CSGO
Cheers.
comp, I want to point that out.
So we have a bit of a colonial adventure because you have all of this good land. As you saw in the previous slide, Zimbabwe is beautiful, and it's also, for the most part, it's like very arable. It's good land for growing crops on, if you want to do that. And for
genociding all the white farmers who deserve it. Let's be clear.
We'll get there. So South Africa is quite a successful colony, but it's sort of a victim of its own success in that now it has a bunch of fail sons who don't know what to do with themselves. And the answer is go out and get more land. If you want to have a plantation, go and get it yourself. So this forms into something called the Pioneer Column, where they march north. Most of these guys think of themselves as South African rather than British. But they're still part of the British Empire. Anyway, they march north. They find a place that they think would be a good place to start a settlement, which they call Fort Salisbury. And then they, hoist the Union Jack, 21 gun salute, 3 cheers for Queen Victoria.
And we get some just amazingly bad accents out of it.
Yes, terrible.
So
the paradigm for colonial exploitation at this point is you don't do it under the auspices of a state, really. What you do is you have a company. So like the East India Company or the Hudson's Bay Company, you have sort of a corporation whose express purpose is to colonize this place. And so what happens is that you have the British South Africa Company, the BSAC, which
that sounds horrifically evil.
Yes, yeah.
Also a little bit dated by that point, the whole concept of using it, because by that point, states were taking more direct control over their colonies. So using a company to do it, because by that point, like the British East India Company was long gone. So they were it was kind of like a return of the classics here.
Yeah, playing the hits. But so the BSAC walk in, they colonize the place just in time to get into the middle of a race war, an ethnic war. The first Matabele War, which is an attempted genocide of Shona by Matabele. The British South Africa Company is in the middle of this. They don't quite know what to make of it other than to put it down with their troops. But this allows them a sort of legitimizing factor, right? They can be like, we came in here as peacekeepers. We are helping these people to, advance towards civilization and not murdering each other by keeping our guns trained on them all the time. Then this is not very popular.
Can't imagine why not.
No, and this starts the second Matabele War, which is the first use of Maxim guns by the British Army against massed infantry, and goes much as you'd expect. This is a specifically anti-British rebellion that is put down, as you can imagine.
What is that? A Maxim gun?
A Maxim gun, first practical machine gun, let's say.
Oh, okay.
It's the first practical machine gun with a single barrel, anyway.
Yeah, and it would go on to be basically, the standard going into World War One, designed by an American who I believe, if I remember correctly, is one of those many military inventions that come across in my field where the designer thinks this will be so awful that it'll prevent people from going to war because it would be so
never
terrible.
Famously always works. Yeah,
it never ever works.
Never works.
So the second Matabele War, it's sometimes called the first Chimurenga, the first resistance liberation. It is crushed. Cecil Rhodes goes there, and in the course of the peace negotiations, which are kind of a joke, he does a bit of self-mythologizing, because instead of sitting with all the white people, he goes and sits down with the black people to try and talk his way out of the rebellion. And this is another part of the sort of foundational mythology of Rhodesia is, he's like trying to peacekeep himself, right? And the mode of colonization that we're talking about in Rhodesia initially they go out there looking for gold because there's gold in South Africa, there's diamonds in South Africa. They're like, there's got to be shit up here that we can mine, and there kind of isn't. It's good land for agriculture, and that's about it. And so
they find stuff later, but at the time they just don't have the technology or wherewithal to find it, so it's farming time.
Yeah. And because like colonization is by definition it's an extractive impulse, the mode of it is a sort of a familiar one for British colonization, which is plantation, right? You you don't have a lot of natural resources like to dig out of the ground. What you do instead is you have white agriculture with a handful of white farmers and a shitload of black labor, and particularly you're even farming tobacco, right?
Bring back all the classics.
Exactly. And
play the hits, Alice.
If you want a good example of material conditions or whatever, this creates exactly the same kind of planter aristocracy as it has everywhere else this has been tried.
Shouting at some dude with the worst accent you've ever heard to play your old stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So most of this settlement, this happens in southern Rhodesia. Rhodesia's bisected by the Zambezi River. Northern Rhodesia has more sort of like stuff you can dig out of the ground.
Yeah.
So we're mostly going to be talking about southern Rhodesia. Next slide, please. So
in the sun.
We have a beautiful postcard here of colonial Rhodesia. And the mode of exploitation here is forced labor, hut taxes, animal taxes for cattle, but also, you know, for the legitimizing thing, we built railways and stuff in order to move all of this tobacco. Eventually, this sort of anomaly of company rule disappears. It's taken directly into British government control. And there becomes this sort of political question of whether Rhodesia is going to govern itself as an independent colony or join the Union of South Africa, which is what everyone expects it to do.
Mm-hmm.
In the South African constitution at that time, there are like provisions for governing what becomes Rhodesia. But there's a vote, and they vote for self-government because the planters, the aristocracy, they don't like the idea of being South African. They like the idea of being Rhodesian. They like this idea of like us against the world, us ourselves.
A common theme in planter economies, it seems. They just don't. They do not like. They do not like anyone telling them what to do.
You could take your rugged individualism and shove it up your ass.
Exactly.
It's very easy to feel like a rugged individualist when you have a shitload of other people picking the tobacco leaves.
Yeah, when you have virtual slavery, maybe not official codified slavery, but basically
literal,
slavery.
Yeah, but basically, as near as it makes no difference. Slavery.
A fun little thing about this artifact, a company role I like, is when the British South Africa Police are founded, which will retain that name even after this stops being, called that. It was still founded under company rule, which basically means you had this company running a colony that also had its own police force, effectively making this the Victorian equivalent of RoboCop.
Yeah.
Basically, Omni Consumer Products, had to invent a mechanical Turk constable to keep ruffians from robbing the Salisbury General Store.
So World War II happens, and one of the things about Rhodesia is that, sort of unusually for a British colony, it provides a lot of troops. I think proportionally more white Rhodesians get killed than like white British colonists of any other colony outside the dominions like Australia or Canada. They form sort of a relatively independent military as well, right. Which will come back to haunt us later. But this is another part of sort of like the national mythology is Rhodesians are patriotic, are martial, we'll come off of the farm or whatever and train to be a pilot and fly Spitfires or whatever.
It's this sort of like gentleman, scholar, farmer, philanthropist sort of colonialist thing going on.
Yes, yeah, exactly. But after the Second World War, the British government, the new Labour government, pursues a policy of decolonization. Next slide, please. And I got to talk about some engineering for this one. There's some actual engineering, got some stuff that got built.
Oh boy.
So the UK wants its colonies to decolonize, to become democracies, right? They want to be independent. They want them to be independent of the UK and to be governed under majority rule, which in Africa means black rule, right? Because that's how disparate the population is. It's like, at most 10% white people, probably far less than that. If everyone gets a vote, then that's a government that is, it's going to elect black politicians. This is unthinkable to colonists, to white Rhodesians. But so the UK creates this federation of Rhodesia to try and hold it together as a colony, and it doesn't work because there's internal contradictions, right? Northern Rhodesia, the one with all the mines, it doesn't have this sort of like planter psycho shit. All of the guys, all of the white people there, they work in mining companies. They can still do that even if it's a democracy, even if it's a nominal democracy. Whereas Southern Rhodesia, that the farm that you have built using your forced labor is your patrimony, right? And so Northern Rhodesia will eventually decolonize relatively simply and become Zambia. Southern Rhodesia does not. What it does do is it uses this time in Federation to take all of that copper and gold money from the north, line its own pockets, and build the Kariba Dam, it dams the Zambezi. And right after they do this, the whole Federation collapses. Southern Rhodesia just becomes a Rhodesia. The Kariba Dam is like, it's a metaphor, right, for the whole process of colonization, because it's now falling apart. Climate change means that it gets drought and it gets flood, which are two things that you don't really want for a dam. It's very, very difficult to repair. If you do repair it, there's a significant risk that you'll make it worse. And if it collapses,
that's my favorite
then
kind of repair.
Yeah, exactly.
I just love the idea of like, yeah, we're gonna fix the problem and make it better for everyone, and then you just kill 30,000 people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really tough fun here.
If this collapses, it takes out another dam downriver. Southern Africa loses like 40% of its power.
And Zimbabwe and South Africa regularly flood. Like, there is not a year that you do not read a news story about Zimbabwe and South Africa having a flood that kills people. It happens every year.
Well, you got to assume that, this project was used for the purpose of rural electrification and improving the lives of Rhodesians everywhere, right?
So about this, so in order to build a dam, you have to move a lot of people generally, because people live in the river valley and they live in the bit that's going to be the reservoir. So they do a lot of population clearance, which is not done very nicely. But what they do is they do a thing called, I think it's Operation Ark, they call it, where they very nicely save all of the wildlife.
Oh,
so
that's nice of them.
Yeah.
They rescue all of the little monkeys and zebras.
As long as we get all the
exterminating a bunch of people.
Yeah, as long as we get all the dogs out of Kabul, everyone else will be fine.
It takes like a year to fill the reservoir. The animals move anyway.
Yeah, just putting them. I don't. Okay, well, yeah.
Incidentally,
it's really easy to do a project like that. You just say you did it, and it happens.
Yeah. It's fine. Everything's fine now. Swayze Reels is like slapping a bumper sticker over the dam. Dropping the mission accomplished banner.
You get some video of a helicopter coming in and picking a lion off of an island. Even though lions can swim.
They literally have. There are still videos of like one sad gibbon that's on a little artificial island, and it's like, okay, fine. Also, incidentally, the word Kariba, which is what this is called, it means trap, because that was the way they tried to explain it to people. We're going to catch and trap the river.
Just the river, nothing else, and no one else.
Yeah, everything's cool. We're still buds. Definitely not gonna. Don't worry about this rifle. That's my buddy Tim's. I'm just holding it for him.
And now Zimbabwe is stuck with this 1960s dam that they can't do anything with. I think they've gotten China to repair part of it recently, but it's still sort of a heavy candidate for a future episode, as well as a synecdoche.
I look forward to its inevitable return as a friend of the pod, the Kariba Dam.
A mysterious act of God's love.
That's right.
Right
I
into
was in
40,000 people's
Schenectady
lives.
last week.
Why?
Getting COVID.
Yeah, getting COVID. No,
That's where you go to get COVID
by
now.
that point. I was only there for a second. I was on the train.
Oh, okay. Well, I was in Westchester County, New York yesterday, so that was fun.
Hopefully not getting COVID.
No,
Hopefully.
I don't have COVID.
So,
Ross, I'm going to come over there and breathe in your mouth.
Then you'll also get COVID.
Yeah, it's too late. I already have the COVID. You can't make it worse.
Yeah,
Try your
buddy,
best.
I can make it worse. That is my skill in life, is just making shit worse. Breakup, miscarriage, marriage, dating. Yeah, I can make everything worse.
Never a podcast, strangely. So the UK. So the UK has this one.
Love you so much.
Love you too. Has this rare-based policy called NIBMA: no independence before majority rule. If you want to get rid of London, you have to become a democracy or else.
Not just a rare-based British policy, a rare-based Tory policy. Like, the Winds of Change was a Harold Macmillan thing. He went to South Africa and said the party's over, which is back when the Tories sometimes had a backbone about things.
I think part of it was just being an outsider, right? Like, I think if you were within the sort of the white population of South Africa or Rhodesia, it genuinely, you could not process the idea that this was not a sustainable form of government. And then if you came in from the outside and you saw, wait a second, there's like 100 of these guys to one of you, you're making them do all of the menial labor and all of them hate you. This is going to end with either you resigning or them making you. People looked at you like you were speaking Martian.
Yeah, no, we're going to talk about the amounts of self-delusion and all the folk songs that resulted.
Absolutely. So because of these processes, because of these humiliations and inequalities, this leads to, next slide please, African national liberation, decolonization, and very often communism movements. The good guys.
That's it.
It's because
communists, famous for being the good guys.
Well, communism is in the 60s, and particularly the really dangerous kind of communism where you like go around liberating the oppressed peoples of the third world. And so this leads to the formation of two groups. And these mirrored like splits both in communist ideology and in then Rhodesian society, right? So we have our two guys on the top right here.
I'm amazed that communists manage to liberate anything because they're always sniffing their own butts. Because what communists do is lick their own butts. This is my very sophisticated political critique.
If we're talking about liberating Zimbabwe, we'll sort of judge how good a job communism made of that. But so on the left here, the guy with the glasses, that's Robert Mugabe.
Pictured here before the fall from grace.
Yeah, still had the very pronounced philtrum.
He should have stuck with the shorter haircut. He looks better with it.
Yeah, he was kind of handsome.
He's a very handsome man.
Just like Gaddafi.
I like the guy to his right who just looks like he's sort of in total disbelief.
Oh, you mean Dr. Joshua Nkomo?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So Mugabe is the head of an organization called ZANU. The Zimbabwe National Union, I want to say.
The Zimbabwe African National Union, correct.
And this is Maoist for the most part because the Soviets won't give Mugabe the guns that he wants, so he just goes to the Chinese.
That is understandable. I would do the same thing.
And this also results in sort of a Maoist theory of how to liberate Zimbabwe, which is rural peasantry, same as what worked for Mao. All right, you take a sort of a Chinese system of revolution and you apply it to the circumstances of Zimbabwe. Incidentally, that means that a lot of their support is Shona people, not exclusively, but later on this will take on a sort of a more sectarian, more ethnic divide. On the right, you have Joshua Nkomo, who is head of ZAPU, the Zimbabwe Armed People's Union.
African People's Union,
African People's Union. And they're mostly into Bele. And this is their sort of insurgency is on the Soviet mold, because Joshua Nkomo is the Kremlin's guy. Like, because as we know, the Soviet Union never took a sort of chauvinistic or domineering attitude towards the Third World. It certainly never considered that Moscow was the head office of the revolution, and therefore they got to decide who the branch office manager was. But if they had, hypothetically, they would have decided that Joshua Nkomo was their branch office manager. He was like the kind of guy that they wanted, and therefore they were going to like install him at the head of this, and they were going to like liberate it on a Soviet model of revolution, which is urban factory workers. You have sort of a very mechanized form of war. You can sort of compare these two to like the sort of the North Vietnamese army compared to the Viet Cong. Right?
Now, what is the sort of main factory work that goes on in Rhodesia at this point? What kind of heavy industry? What kind of goods are they exporting? That has all these factories.
Curiously, there's a bit of chrome mining, which is like, or not mining, but processing. That's the major like heavy industry. And then you have a lot of like light industry, but you've sort of identified a serious problem here, which is that there are a fuckload more rural peasants than there are urban workers.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with like the huge like car factories of Rhodesia or whatever, you know,
Yes.
like people working on the assembly lines.
A lot of, but it's one of those safari wagons that Renault put out in the 70s.
Yeah, everyone knows that Salisbury was the Detroit of Southern Africa. The other sort of problem here is the Soviets don't really know how to do unconventional war in the same way the Maoists do. Their instinct is always to try and raise a conventional force as quickly as possible.
You gotta stop doing that.
Yeah. What you want is to make a little red army, and you want to roll it straight in like it's Berlin. It's not really until sort of Angola later on, and they realize that the Cubans have a better idea of how to do people's war than they do.
Still turning up with a folded gap for some reason.
Yeah. Also, I forgot to mention one of my favorite facts about Joshua Nkomo, history's most radical Georgist.
Of course he is.
You didn't really have to be a very doctrinaire communist to be Moscow's guy, and so his thing was Georgism, you know?
Sure. Why the hell not, man?
You know what?
Yeah, sure.
Could have been worse.
So we're setting the stage here for a little insurgency, a little bush war or series of wars. But what happens is there's a political decision made in 1965 where Rhodesia has had enough of this idea of majority rule in order to get independence. And our next slide, please, Guy, conducts something called UDI, Unilateral Declaration of Independence.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Hey, do you want to talk about Ian Smith?
I'm going to need a fresh beer to talk about this motherfucker. We're going to talk about Ian Douglas Smith.
With the ass in there.
Emphasis on the ass, yeah.
Yeah. And basically, he is going to be the author of all our pain here. He will be the prime minister of Rhodesia for almost the entirety of its, I might emphasize, unrecognized independence. No one ever recognizes Rhodesia, not even its so-called allies.
It was a rogue state. It was a pariah state.
Good.
Yeah,
right in his dumb face.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. You know, so just let no one ever tell you, anything other than Rhodesia was just a nothing that no one wanted anything really to do with. So a brief summary of his life up until UDI is sort of, he was born into sort of a well-to-do family. His dad, I think, saw that nice poster that Alice showed us and came there from, I think, Northumberland. His dad did like basically what I can describe shortly as rich white landowner shit, farming, mining, business. He was a member of the local Masons Lodge.
Rancid vibes in that lodge, I imagine.
It's got to be the most cursed Freemasons
Just
lodge
a bunch
anywhere
of guys
in the British
like
Empire.
Sweating in these incredibly hot aprons in the middle of an African summer.
Just wait a second.
So he goes to college, and after World War II has begun, he joins the Air Force, gets sent to the Mediterranean, where he will unfortunately cheat death twice. First occasion, I believe, is 1943, when I think it was a Hawker Hurricane, crashes shortly after takeoff in Egypt. He breaks just about every bone in his body, is horrifically burned, very nearly dies.
Didn't finish the job.
Didn't finish the job, though. I do have to give critical support to Hawker Aircraft Limited for almost killing him.
This sort of John McCain level of combination of political inability and piloting inability.
They have to reconstruct his face, which is why the right side of his face looks a little off. It will become more pronounced as he gets older.
They did a good job considering. Like, you look at some of the like early plastic surgery from the Second World War.
That's the first time he cheats death. The second time is he gets shot down over northern Italy on a mission in 1944. I'm not going to give critical support to German anti-aircraft gunners, but I'm going to still wish that they finished the job.
The important thing is that
Ian Smith would have fit right in with them. I don't know.
For so many times in World War II, there are guys shooting at each other going, but the important thing is we're both racist.
Yeah, that's the thing.
I know that, so many of these surgery doesn't refer to actual plastic, but I am imagining they had to reconstruct his face with the old kind of plastic that the exploding billiard balls were made of.
Oh, yeah.
Bakelite?
Yeah. Bakelite, yeah.
Reconstructing your face out of the same thing you make AK magazines out of.
I mean, they used to do this in the First World Wars. They would make like facial prostheses with like out of tin and like
all those things that look creepy
like
as hell. Like I think there was a guy that wears it in like Boardwalk Empire or something.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You look like a Cyberman out of Doctor Who.
You guys are racist and not cool about it.
Yeah. That cannot emphasize enough how much Ian Smith is racist and not cool. He gets shot down. He does some like partisan bullshit for a while. Eventually, he is found and rescued by the U.S. military. Sorry,
this guy and a bunch of fucking communist partisans. They're all singing Bella Ciao, and he's like, "I can't wait to get home and do racism."
Which is what he does after the war. Is he gets sent home and he does some racism by running for office and being elected to parliament. And for a while, he's just kind of, a nobody. He's just a backbencher. He doesn't really do a lot. What gets him his wings is basically when the whole discussion of decolonization comes about. And he sort of becomes the voice in he becomes the most right-wing person in an already extraordinarily white right-wing country.
In his own mouth.
Yeah, like he becomes the guy who's basically not only no, but hell no when it comes to decolonization. And he sort of gets a boost from this, him and his party, which would eventually be called the Rhodesia Front, from essentially the crisis in the Congo, where you see a lot of dead white Belgian colonists in the streets that really freak out all the Rhodesian farmers. And it sort of propels his party into office right as the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland is falling apart.
Yeah, and the awareness begins to strike, and a little bit of like, not even guilt, but just awareness that like, oh, all of this shit I've been doing for my entire life could end with me getting hacked to death with machetes.
Yeah, they've done a lot of sowing, and he's starting to see the reaping on the horizon, and his attitude is just, well, I would rather not.
Yeah.
So to that extent, they sweep into power, and then he even ousts his own party leader for not being right-wing enough dealing with the British in terms of negotiating. There wasn't really much negotiating. It was just the British were like, you need to decolonize, and it was the Rhodesians going, no. So in 1965, you have the Unilateral Declaration of Independence. Very immediately, he outlaws and cracks down on almost all the African nationalist parties after getting into power. And we just start on a path to unavoidable war. So basically, of everything that's about to happen, you can lay a good chunk of it at this man's feet.
Yeah, the sort of dead hand of white supremacy clinging on. So we've talked about ZANU and ZAPU, who would like develop armed organizations as a response to this. Now we've got to talk about the other bad guys opposed to Ian Smith. Next slide, please. We got to talk about the Rhodesian security forces.
Because of course we do. Because not only do we have to talk about them, because this is what most people
dumb hat.
Yeah, dumb.
Yeah.
It's a dumb hat.
It's a terrible poster, is the thing.
Yet people just masturbate furiously to this goddamn thing. And we have to talk about them not just because their image is so associated with Rhodesia's existence, but Rhodesia could not exist without the Rhodesian security forces because it was
sort of a large hostage situation of a country.
Yeah. Well, Rhodesia was unusual in that it was most British colonies at the time did not have its own military. Like, you had some of the Commonwealth dominions that had their own militaries, like Canada and Australia and so on. But by this point, by like World War II, they're already functionally independent countries. They share a monarch, they have political, economic, military connections, but they are independent. Rhodesia was not, but it still had its own military. The most you had compared to this in other places where you had locally raised regiments like the King's African Rifles or the Gurkhas and stuff, but they were still part of the British Army. Rhodesia had its own military wholesale. Like, they would integrate at points during war, but it was still basically independent. They controlled their procurement and things like that. And at
it was
the time,
much larger. You have multiple regiments of infantry. You have a cavalry regiment, which is what we see here with the little armored cars.
Yeah. Maintained by conscription exclusively at this point of white men who then went on to become reservists who could be called up. At this point, black and mixed race people could join, but it wouldn't be till later they would join in larger numbers, and you get some interesting dynamics later on as the Rhodesians get more desperate. But at this time, it's predominantly white, small but unfortunately well trained, well equipped. At the time of UDI, they have helicopters, they have jet fighters, they have jet bombers. They'll get more of those from South Africa as the war goes on. But having a military right off the bat when most colonies did not meant when they declared UDI, they could immediately protect themselves both against an internal rebellion, but also basically create a deterrent from anyone who might want to do an invasion to overturn UDI, which was something while is a little bit laughable, was not completely out of the cards at the time. There were serious discussions among the British government of should we invade to force them to,
which we should have done. Rule. We should have done it. Blow up a couple of these fucking armored cars. Blow up a few vampires or whatever on the runway at Salisbury.
I'm not handing it. I'm not giving it to the British, but what I am saying, the logistics were not quite on their side, because if you wanted to invade Rhodesia, and you can't go up through South Africa because they weren't going to fucking let you do it. You can't go in through Mozambique because the Portuguese weren't going to let you do it. And really that left going through Zambia by way of Tanzania, and I don't think either of them were especially eager to have thousands of British troops on their soil several years after independence. So they were kind of between a rock and a hard place, even if they wanted to do it. But yeah, depending on who you talk to on the internet, not that I think any of us are really talking to these types of people. This was one of the most
depending
elite
on what posts you read. Yeah.
Depending on what posts you read, this is one of the most elite military formations that was ever raised in the history of warfare. Masters of counterinsurgency, masters of counterterrorism. To which I say, check the scoreboard,
count the rings.
Yep. But these are just they're known especially for some of their quote unquote elite units, the Rhodesian Light Infantry. The Soloi. I never know how to pronounce.
Silas
Scouts.
Named after like Frederick Silas, who was one of the scouts on the Pioneer column way back.
Right. And then the Rhodesian SAS, who actually cut their teeth in the Malay emergency. All bastards. And all people who are going to make the next, 10 to 15 years a living hell for everyone who isn't white living in this country.
Yeah. So, of course, insurgency breaks out more or less immediately. After UDI, so 65 or so.
And we'll get to that on, I think, next slide, please.
Having thus seen our contestants, so this is remarkably low scale. This is one of your small wars, right? At this point,
right? They don't immediately move into large scale arms. Like, depending on who you read. You can. I tend to go with the school of dividing this war up into three phases. And the early phase goes from 1965 to like the early mid 70s. And ZANU and ZAPU don't immediately move into large scale armed struggle. Part of this is they're still hoping the British might actually intervene militarily, which again we kind of laugh now, but wasn't completely out of the question at the time. Yeah. And as it becomes more obvious the British may not do anything, they establish their own armed wings to try and do something about this. So ZANU establishes the Zimbabwe African National Liberation Army, or ZANLA, and ZAPU establishes the Zimbabwe People's Revolutionary Army, or ZIPRA. And they start doing some small-scale operations. ZIPRA primarily works out of Zambia, formerly Northern Rhodesia, and ZANLA mainly operates out of the areas of northern Mozambique, which are controlled by Frelimo, which is
where the Rhodesians can't like attack over the border except when they want to do like a big set piece thing, which they will occasionally do later in the war for propaganda reasons as much as anything else. But for the most part, it's a lot like Vietnam in this way, is that you have this border that Rhodesian troops are sort of like largely unable to cross, where you can just have a rear area for your insurgency where you can train, where you can re-equip.
Right. But at this point, they're mainly just doing
my rear area of insurgency.
Oh, baby.
So the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
Yeah. They're doing mostly just small scale infiltration, insurgency, sabotage, nothing huge. The first real major
you look at like after action reports, and it's like a guy with an AK shoots at like a farmhouse from the bush, hits nothing, leaves.
And even the first major battle, quote unquote major, is relatively small. You have a small column of like a squad size element of, I think, Zanla forces who are trying to, I think they were trying to cut a pipeline. And they get intervened by a group of the BSAP, the British South Africa Police, mainly reservists who are basically just farmers who also have a police uniform in their closet. And that first battle, is a complete. Don't get me wrong, the Rhodesians win it, but it's a complete shit show for everyone involved. Like the only reason
it's a huge boost to the Rhodesian army because Smith and others decide that this means that the police are like inequipped to deal with an insurgency, which is true.
They miss so many times, like, and then the Zanla guys basically like they lose because they run out of ammunition. Everyone's just firing wildly. It's like the A team; they're just kicking up dust at each other's feet. There's a Rhodesian helicopter with a gunner who shoots at one guy, and I think they like let off like several hundred rounds of ammunition before they actually finally kill the guy. So it's a complete mess, and no one really all these attacks are very much of a muchness. They don't accomplish anything. And I mean, once the military gets involved over the police, the Rhodesians really have the upper hand in this period. You don't have to hand it to them, but they are effectively they're winning the battles. Zipper tries to get the upper hand by teaming up with the armed wing of the African National Congress in South Africa, the MK, who I'm not going to try and pronounce their name because I will butcher it.
Wesizwe is my effort. Beautiful. There. Yeah.
You're braver than I am, Alice.
Let me know in the comments if I've got that wrong.
And all that really accomplishes is it scares the absolute shit out of South Africa, and they send a bunch of troops. They call them police, but it's troops and aid to Rhodesia to bolster them, which just makes things go even better for them in this era.
Yeah, this is a recurring theme, is that like South Africa is always the silent partner at this point, because their view is, it's better to be fighting the insurgency there in Rhodesia than to be fighting it in South Africa, which was, essentially their feeling was if Rhodesia becomes a democracy, it will then become the sort of over the border rear area for whatever insurgency happens in South Africa.
Exactly. So by the 1970, both Zipper and Zanla basically pause their attempts at infiltration and just sort of like go back to the drawing board to rethink their approach. And the effect this will have in the long term is it makes the Rhodesians feel very overconfident, cocky, complacent. They're basically like, well, this is what the whole war is going to be. We got this. We can just deal with this indefinitely. And that basically is Rhodesia's strategy at this point, is they're just going to postpone majority rule indefinitely, which, as someone who works with military strategy, I cannot emphasize to you enough how much that is not a strategy.
You do quite literally the forever war. You just keep making it happen, and then you never have to do democracy.
You open up the Rhodesian national security strategy, and it's one sentence, and that sentence is "Don't worry about it." So yeah, they create a strong sense of security and confidence during this period, which makes what's happened next in the next phase of the war a real shock to the Rhodesians. Was shame.
Are they going to get got?
They're going to get got. Well, they're going to get got by world events, which is one of the worst ways you can get got. Next slide, please. So you may notice that one of Rhodesia's borders to its east is Mozambique, which is a Portuguese colony. Portugal is run by a fascist military dictatorship called the Estado Novo, and things go a bit wrong with that. There's a peaceful revolution, an unambiguous win for socialism in 1974, the Carnation Revolution. Where
a rare W where you have
the
a
hippies win.
You have a left-wing democratic socialist revolution largely spearheaded by the army.
The woke troops literally go...
The they-them army.
That's right. That one guy with the communism will win hat at West Point, imagine 50,000 of him.
50,000 of them with carnations and their Heckler and Koch G3 rifles.
Yeah. And they're like, we will not maintain an African colony anymore. We will not do fascism anymore.
Yep.
We would like to do democracy now. And they oust the regime. This leads to the independence of Mozambique in 1975. It's the top right picture. And Frelimo, which is the communist insurgency in Mozambique, led here by an incredibly attired General Samora Machel.
He is working that Castro fit.
Oh,
absolutely. Becomes, it gains control of Mozambique. And this leads to, like, instead of being like mostly safe to run an insurgency from, Mozambique becomes 100% safe to run an insurgency from.
You guys go have fun. We'll be here making dinner when you get back.
Exactly, because now the government is on your side.
Yeah, like, and at this point, like, it's just such a huge deal for Rhodesia because previously they only had to worry about one part of Mozambique, and now you have their entire eastern border is now something they have to worry about. Where Zanla has all these safe havens where they can train, equip, reorganize, all these things. This is a nightmare for the Rhodesians. They also lose a source of their support because they were getting supported by the Estado Novo government, who were helping supply them with oil and other things. But that's not the only problem they're running into, because South Africa at this point is increasingly becoming tired of Rhodesia's bullshit. They've never we touched on this a bit earlier, but they never really quite liked each other. This is my big thing is don't let anyone ever tell you that there's no such thing as right-wing infighting and it's only left-wing infighting. Right-wingers fight with each other all the time, and this is an excellent example of it, because even though they have things in common, they can't quite get over their hang-ups. The Rhodesians don't really respect the South Africans a lot at this phase, because when the South Africans send troops, they're not very experienced. They're kind of blundering all over. The Rhodesians think they're a joke. Meanwhile, the South Africans don't like the Rhodesians because they think they're too British.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Bear in mind, a lot of white Rhodesian identity is based around not being South African, a thing which in every other respect you are.
Yeah,
sure.
Like they're basically, they see them as like essentially just being like Bush British. They're Savannah Gaz.
Rack off me. Wait, that's Australian.
Well, I often describe the Rhodesian accent as being like an Australian guy trying to sound like he's doing the South African accent. It's like a it's like a Bunta Vista guy trying to do a Dirk Vanderklerk voice.
Yeah, but there's also been a blockade of Rhodesia, which, it limits their ability to obtain guns and planes and tanks.
Like the South Africans send them, but they put caps on how much they're willing to send in terms of oil and supplies. They basically put a cap on how much they're willing to actually break the embargo.
Yeah.
And that cap's going to get smaller because we have an unexpected intervention here by friend of the pod, Henry Alfred Kissinger.
The most ethical man in the world.
Who's basically coming here fresh off of as many other successful quote unquote peacemaking efforts to solve the Rhodesia problem. And he comes in, and the South Africans at this point, they're trying to cool things down too. They despite also being delusional about their long-term survival, they also know they can't fight everyone at once. So they're trying to seek basically a détente with the other African nations in Southern Africa to sort of buy them some space and time. And Kissinger works with them to basically put pressure on Rhodesia to basically actually come to the negotiating table and do something serious. And this sort of drives home that despite their supposed, anti-communist credentials, which we'll talk about, Rhodesia is just kind of the kid in the class that no one really wants anything to do with if you're respectable. Like, no one really wants anything to do with these guys. It's just, they see it as an unfortunate reality they have to sometimes interact with. So,
yeah, for sure.
In 1976, under pressure from the U.S., under pressure from South Africa, Ian Smith agrees to majority rule, quote unquote, in principle within 2 years. So we're done, right? Podcast over, right?
No, because we go back to the big strategy that they have, which is keep putting it off forever.
Exactly. So we're not quite done yet, and the Rhodesians are going to keep doing all the things they have been doing in hopes it will protect them. One example of which is on the next slide.
We get to talk about the big set piece shit, their special move, the thing that they love to do.
Oh, they're ulting?
Yeah, everybody fucking. If you talk to a guy who's a little too interested in Rhodesia, they are going to mention Fire Force, which I can only describe as a Rube Goldberg-ass way of doing counterinsurgency.
It's something that you can only do if you have an air force, a big country that you can't get around very easily, and an absolute necessity of maintaining settler colonialism.
Yeah, it's like everyone acts like this is the greatest fucking thing ever, and I just see this as sort of basically like, if you look at it carefully enough, is an indicator of all of Rhodesia's weaknesses, in which they don't have a lot of troops, they have a lot of territory to cover, and they have a lot of insurgents coming into their territory. None of these seem like good things, but Rhodesia boos will act like this is the most brilliant thing ever.
Yeah.
No, you don't understand. It's so sophisticated that first they have to drop paratroopers in because the helicopters won't get there fast enough, and that they have to do this and do that.
This is one of the other problems, is its sophistication. It's very sort of it's very elaborate, right? The idea is that you find insurgents who are trying to infiltrate the country. Ideally, you catch them in the open or in a village, and then you use a combination of dropping paratroopers on top of them, or like sort of helicopter-borne infantry and helicopter air support to like contain them and kill as many of them as possible. However, this takes for fucking ever. It's a huge deployment of resources. It works very well, but you might be killing a couple of dozen people at a time. And, you could miss another 3 or 4 of these while you're engaging in this big sort of like ballet of moving your little counters around on a map.
I also want to put out here, if you look at where that Alouette 3 helicopter is firing near those huts, none of those guys appear to have weapons, those stick figures.
Don't need them.
Oh, well, yeah.
No, that's genocide.
Hearts and minds is not something that is practiced in Rhodesia for a long time during the Bush War.
Like this whole thing works initially in the initial phase because they're not dealing with a very strong insurgency, but this whole thing really falls apart from the mid-70s on, as basically the tide of numbers. I mean, it makes me think of a quote I heard about the Vietnam War from an American journalist, which was basically, we were fighting the birth rate of a nation. In this case, the Rhodesians were just fighting the entirety of the nation, because they weren't really the nation. They were just a bunch of guys who showed up and decided we own it.
Yeah, for sure. This is written about so lovingly in like military history circles. If you look at the Wikipedia entry for Fire Force, it has sentences on it like, the plight of the civilians was most profoundly realized by the troops. Citation needed.
Was it now?
Well, I mean, citation needed.
White man's burden.
So like, you can talk for hours and hours, and previously we did, about the sort of Rhodesian military strategy and tactics. But next slide, please. That's sort of a problem, because it always acts as if Rhodesia is a perfect test bed, right? Where Rhodesia is just inventing counterinsurgency methods on a totally passive enemy, which they're not, right? They're fighting a serious insurgency that is doing an effective Maoist People's War, especially in its later stages.
With some serious fits. Look at these.
Oh, incredible stuff. The like yellow turtleneck, the guy just holding like what I think looks like a loose RPG round.
As you do.
No, that's are you talking about that guy in the top left picture?
Yeah.
That's an older RPG. That's the RPG 2, which is like first generation, which is literally just like a tube with a rocket on the end.
Incredible.
And then you have that guy in the bottom left with the pig sticker Chinese AK bayonet. Yeah. It's just great stuff all around.
So these guys didn't get a lot of write-ups about how cool they were. For some reason that I can't quite put my finger on. And it is difficult to talk about or to write about, because like Very few of these guys wrote memoirs. Those of them that did tend to be quite heavily propagandized. But we have these two insurgency groups. We have Zanla and Zipra. Zanla's sort of operating a more conventional insurgency. Zipra is mostly waiting for Zanla to do the hard work and then drive in.
I respect that work ethic.
They have like a couple of BTRs, like Soviet-wheeled armored personnel carriers, that they're just like keeping in reserve, and they're just going to drive in over the border when the moment looks right. And bear in mind those armored cars from earlier. I think if the Rhodesians saw sort of Zimbabwean BTRs coming over the horizon, that would have been a wet dream for them.
They did actually end up basically capturing a lot of Zipra's armored vehicles and just using them themselves because they didn't have a lot, which is hilarious.
So your Zanla like offensive operation is exactly the kind of nasty insurgent guerrilla stuff that you expect worldwide. You know, you mine roads because only troops and white people are going to be driving. Sure. You do bombings. They bomb a Woolworths in Salisbury.
Oh God, the Woolworths has fallen. Oh my God. Where am I supposed to get my discount scarves now?
Where was it? Like, I think it was, oh brother, where art thou? Just like a couple of bombers getting thrown out of the Woolworths, and stay out of Woolworths.
But they do little like ambushes, sniping. Like generally speaking, what you don't want to do is you don't want to fight the Rhodesian army, especially not in a pitched battle. You want to shoot one or two of them at a time and place of your choosing, and then leave.
Right. It's Mao's Guide to Insurgency, of which there are 3 phases, and they're still very much in the first, maybe second phase, which eventually will culminate in a conventional war. The Soviets tend to just want to immediately jump to stage 3. Mao's like, no, we got to take our time with this shit.
Fold a gap.
You also have attacks on like isolated soft targets, so like white-owned farms, missionary posts, boarding schools even, which leads me to one observation, which is that this is not what you'd call a nice war, if there's such a thing. It's not a very Geneva Convention obeying war.
It's a guerrilla war.
On either side.
Guerrilla.
Yeah. Like, you know, both sides tortured, both sides killed civilians more or less indiscriminately. Both used that as propaganda against the other. This is possibly the only thing that separated Zanla from the Rhodesian security forces was like they probably raped more people, but even that's not like a 0 number on the Rhodesian side either. So,
and to be fair, this is to clarify, not that, you know, I think any of us are saying this. This does not mean that like, oh, both sides were just as bad. The Rhodesians were still absolutely the bad guys, but you know, you see the situation where this sort of settler colonium creates, where everything is awful, even for the good guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And also this is like the method of war that they had been trained to pursue. It was a doctrine. It wasn't sort of like ill discipline. It was explicitly a sort of a political and military objective.
The cruelty is the point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this sort of like, this affects their popular support too. You get into this situation where a lot like with the Viet Cong, it becomes questionable whether people are collaborating with them out of sympathy, coercion, often the chance to like use them against your own personal enemies. Like there's a guy you don't like, you say, hey, that guy's informing against you, and you send him off to get killed. And it's probably a bit of all of those.
Yep.
But so the sort of objectives of this insurgency are, as I say, you don't fight the army. What you want to do is you want to create a climate of hostility and terror that like dries up their sources of information. No one talks to the army because you'll get killed. Dries up their sources of cooperation. No one joins the army because they're going to get killed. It shuts down industry, especially tourism. Like you shoot up a resort or whatever, no one's coming back for the next year. You raise white emigration from the country.
Discounts though, Alex.
Yeah. So you dry up their manpower, and also you make the Rhodesian soldier even more racist and even more afraid and even more stupid, so that they act in worse ways that you can then use against them, that will then radicalize people against them. None of it's nice, but you know, I think one thing that's always missing from narratives about Rhodesia is that this was a strategy. It was pursued deliberately. Zanla were good at it, and it worked.
Yeah. So this is I guess this next slide then.
So I always like this poster. Make money. Look for this. Nah.
I think that poster has the same energy as a poster you would see in the London Underground.
It's just like, say it sorted. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, these are some of the things carried by terrorists.
Yeah. You will be paid up to that. Yeah, it's just it absolutely just feels like something you would see in the underground of the 70s. But so yeah, this is the final stage of the war, 1976 to 1979, where shit really gets real for Rhodesia, and they start to realize we can't just wait our way out of this.
Just noticed the first $sign in this poster has 2 lines, but the second one only has 1 line.
That's true. Terrible typesetting.
That's very bad typesetting.
It just goes to show how standards were just falling by the wayside by the later phases of the war.
Because the black man wanted rights, yes.
Because Zandler had shot the guy who puts the second brushstroke through the $sign before he did the second one.
Well, what are you going to do?
Or either that or the guy decided to emigrate and they just needed to get the poster out on time. But it escalates dramatically from 1977 on. Zandler and Zipper guerrillas are infiltrating in far greater numbers than they were before. They're launching
my favorite thing when we're recording, I don't know if it's picking up on my mic, is just the screams of the 9 other people in this house.
It just means that you're living in the hip happening place to be.
Later, you have some weird buzzing on your audio.
Yeah, it's blowing out the game a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me go in the menus.
Yep. But you're getting
any better. Worse?
Yes.
Better?
Yeah, it's good. It's just I think you were just slightly too close to the microphone.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's a headset mic. Sorry, I'm a gamer. I need to keep that thing on me in case I need to drop.
What's your favorite slur?
You don't have to answer that.
No, it's Oh, do you remember the time someone accused me of saying slurs? That's why we used the censor thing? Because I was busy saying slurs, and it's like, no, it's because I'm busy saying you should go to Brett Kavanaugh him and his dumb corpse over to fuck. Stop censoring me.
I don't even know how I'm going to bleep that out later because Alice tried to bleep it out, but I have to do it in post for it to actually work. Hi, it's Justin. So this is a commercial for the podcast that you're already listening to. People are annoyed by these, so let me get to the point. We have this thing called Patreon, right? The deal is you give us $2 a month, and we give you an extra episode once a month. Sometimes it's a little inconsistent, but, it's $2. You get what you pay for. It also gets you our full back catalog of bonus episodes, so you can learn about exciting topics like guns, pickup trucks, or pickup trucks with guns on them. The money we raise through Patreon goes to making sure that the only ad you hear on this podcast is this one. Anyway, that's something to consider if you have $2 to spare each month. Join at patreon.com/WTYP pod. Do it if you want. Or don't. It's your decision, and we respect that. Back to the show.
Shit, fuck.
Look, it's still not as bad as the first time we tried to record this, where the
25 minutes of actionable threats.
Release the Liam cut.
Release the Liam cut. All right, let's get through this bitch. I'm I would just want to get drunk, man.
We'll get there. We're getting there. So
let's
they're
go,
launching
speed run it, baby.
They're launching larger, more ambitious, more destructive attacks. They're killing more people. They're making things more unsettled. The Rhodesian security forces also escalating. They're launching cross-border raids into Mozambique and Zambia to try and attack Zandler and Zipper where they're training.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
Doesn't work. They try and fluff it up a bit.
Is this man wearing Chuck Taylors?
Yes.
In addition to his...
Listen, I have a rant about this.
Shorts?
It's gonna delay the episode a bit, but I do have a short rant about this, which is wearing sneakers to the war is one of the most effective methods of both insurgency and counterinsurgency. The Chinese People's Liberation Army invaded Korea wearing green canvas liberation shoes that were rip-off Chuck Taylors. Soviet Special Forces in Afghanistan wore sneakers. Increasingly, the US military has been trying to develop a tactical sneaker for years because boots are fucking terrible. If you want to run anywhere, you need to wear sneakers. And so it universally in combat zones, it just becomes adopted anyway.
Yeah, that's my favorite part of the
I
new
love the idea of like just showing up like somewhere outside Kabul, like in Kandahar or somewhere, just rocking like Jordan 11s, being like, all right, let's do it.
Just showing up in your Air Force Ones.
The Taliban won the war in Afghanistan wearing white high tops that they imported from Pakistan.
I would not have worn white if I were going to do an insurgency.
At least not after Labor Day.
At least not after Labor Day. My favorite part of the new spiritual successor to War Game Red Dragon, Warno, is that the Soviet Spetsnaz in the game are wearing makvas. Listen to Lions Led by Donkeys. You'll learn about that. But yeah, so the Rhodesians are doing cross-border raids, both on the ground and in the air. They even helped to start a right-wing opposition group in Mozambique called Renamo to try and weaken the Frelimo government and prevent ZANU or Zanla from having a base there. So they basically contribute to starting Mozambique's own, basically 15-year-long civil war, basically to try and extend their own lifespan. That
calling
war would
your like sort of psyop fascist guerrilla group Renamo is in itself very funny to me.
They put down that it needed to be renamed, and it just ended up getting put as the name as a typo.
God damn it, dude.
And the attacks get more and more, not only just like bigger in terms of the how they look and scare people, but actually having effects. Like they attack a oil refinery outside of Salisbury, which you see in the top right, in 1979, and actually destroy about a quarter of Rhodesia's oil reserves. And when you consider the fact that they don't have a lot of oil at this point, that's a huge blow to them. And also really dumb that they had a quarter of their oil reserves in one easy to access and attack location. But I don't know.
I gotta tell you. So I stood up to get another beer and to get a Red Bull, and just because my butt's starting to fall asleep, and I feel like a businessman. I'm just walking around my room yelling about Rhodesia. Dicks.
Buy, sell.
Dicks.
You know what? I think to get through this next part of the pod, I think you just remind me. I need a new Miller Lite.
For whoever asked, hey, can you shout out the names of the beers you drink on, There's Your Problem? Yeah, I can, and you're not going to like it. I've got a truly strawberry hibiscus margarita, 2 of those that I've killed. Mango chili margarita style hard seltzer that I've killed. And I'm on the last one, which is classic lime margarita style hard seltzer. If this goes over, I will be drinking a 2-year-old Java Stout from Victory, which I don't think they make anymore. Roz, are you drinking or are you sober?
The beer I am drinking is called Dayquil.
You can do both, you fucking baby.
Drinking Dayquil and NyQuil to create something called
stomach
Quill.
lining, dude. Stomach linings add weight. You want to be aerodynamic, bro.
That's a good point.
We also
I'm drinking a Miller Lite, which I'm told is a fine Pilsner beer because it says so on the can, and the truth is in advertising. So I'm not going to interrogate that.
Are you
drinking
a cherry
Coke Zero earlier?
Oh, I thought you might be drinking one of those dark fruit Strongbows.
I'm actually scheduled to take another Dayquil right about now. I'll be right back.
We'll take a break.
Yeah, we could take a break if you want.
All right, so what are the best slurs?
Trying to think, Googling slurs for Rhodesians.
What I'm gonna do is highly encourage every listener here to go to what's her name, Amy Coney Barrett's house, and what you do is now that
I can't even beep it because
now that you've got, what you do is you and you and then you.
Sort of very Yukio Mishima there.
Yeah, I believe that the 4 Supreme Court or the 6 Supreme Court justices should all be.
I say that we should go the North Korean route and break out the anti-aircraft gun.
Yeah, I'm honestly fine with that.
That wasn't the most fucked up North Korean execution method I heard of. All of these are, I assume, fake.
I just can't imagine having to be the guy who has to roll out the AA gun. Like, I understand they're probably trailer pulled or they're stationary.
It's on the back of a truck for sure.
Dude, that would suck. Like, just
that's not the most fucked up.
Into the execution site. Like, I don't want to do this.
That's not the most fucked up North Korean execution method I've heard mooted. One of the more entertainingly fake ones I've heard was execution by mortar. Like, they tie you to a stake and then they put you on a mortar range. No, exactly. You're just sitting there.
That's going to be agonizing because you're just going to be sitting there because these guys are going to probably have shit aim with their mortars and just watching them.
Some dude flipping you off behind his handcuffs, like turning around, pulling his pants down.
On the other hand, maybe it's fine to be executed by mortar because it's one of the only methods of execution where the chance of the executioner getting killed by it is almost as high.
The AA gun doesn't make any sense to me because it's like, that's not exactly torturous. I mean, the guy would just be vaporized at a short distance.
Yeah, maybe that's supposed to be the point in that case where it's less about making them suffer, more about like saying the message of you will be vaporized.
They're supposed to, like in all of these stories, they do this in sports stadiums. And I'm like, I'd like to see the sports stadium that has enough of a backstop to prevent a like ZU-23 round going through a guy, going
into
through
a
berm, going into the concession stand. Yeah.
This just reminds me, if you can stand me enough to ever have me back, that we just need to do an episode on the Sergeant York.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah,
that thing out Bradley's the Bradley, let me tell you.
Yeah.
God. Oh my back.
I was going to say mean things about Roz. Just kidding.
I feel bad saying
can't think of any.
I have nice things to say about Roz.
Yeah.
So funny.
I've missed recording with him, you know? You too, Liam.
I've missed that. I've missed you too. I've missed that Muppety voice of Roz's that he's famous for.
Yeah. I you know, we all love Roz, even if he does sound like horse Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, Roz, can you just say the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog for me?
Yeah. Up yours, woke moralist. We'll see who cancels who.
I forget how good of an impressionist you are.
I almost killed Joe Kasabian with that voice when he was streaming Rising Storm for charity for families affected by Azerbaijan's attack on Armenia.
Azerbaijan Muppet.
God.
I'm back.
Hey,
I subsist on a diet made entirely of meat.
We're back.
The F1 race is outside my apartment. It's not very good there.
You know, it isn't easy being a right-wing demagogue.
Now that you said that, I expect you to cough up roughly a third of your lung.
Oh, God.
No, I took the Dayquil.
Did you take more Dayquil?
Okay. So
did he?
Yes.
Yeah, he did.
Okay.
So we finally get a showing from Zipra, the Soviet-based one, at this point, which is using Soviet surface-to-air missiles, like man-portable air defense. They shoot down a couple of Air Rhodesia planes in 1978 and 1979.
Where were you guys for the fucking helicopters?
Yeah, I know, right? The thing is, helicopters shoot back and like passenger planes don't. This is one of the one of the calculations you got to make in an insurgency. When the first one crashes, a bunch of people are left alive on the ground. They get like very murdered.
Oh, they get
extremely murdered.
Yeah.
The second one, I think, is pretty much.
It's not called a double doink. It's called a double tap. The double doink is how the Eagles snuck into the playoffs a couple years ago.
Double doink attack.
Yeah, the double doink. You get it. The first bomb bounces off the upright, and then it goes across, and the Bears lose. And then
you hear the drone coming, and you just hear, "Is this the dagger?"
What's the military equivalent of icing the kicker?
God. Shooting a civilian helicopter to show them you're serious.
So Joshua and Como lost this off.
And I had to hear the fucking medevac every goddamn night, and I've said this before. I thought to myself, 16-year-old Liam, boy, if I could just get a goddamn RPG-7 up here.
You want an SA-7? That's what you want. If you
don't need an SA-7 from that distance, bud.
God. So these shoot downs, they have a really dramatic effect. Like Alice says, Nkobo laughs it off, but in terms of in Rhodesia, amongst the white population, this had a real chilling effect in combination with everything else, because it sort of showed the Rhodesians a key thing after all their complacency, that there's really no longer anywhere in Rhodesia they're safe. Like stores are getting
closing in.
Yeah, exactly. Stores are getting bombed in Salisbury. Planes are getting shot down. There's no safe zones anymore. This is where you get the rise of white flight, white emigration. Rhodesia's white population peaks, I think, around 1974, 1975. I think like maybe 3,500. I don't have the numbers in front of me. Out of, I think, like 4 or 5 million Africans. And from that point on, it starts on a steady decline because people are like, fuck this shit. I don't want to have to deal with this. And will really accelerate the sort of decline of Rhodesia and the end of the war.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see the sort of Rhodesian military strategy is commit as many atrocities as possible, photos of which make it into the press internationally. They become sort of the broader anti-apartheid campaign. Like those two things are very closely linked, and it's actually very successful at showing the Rhodesian military for what they're actually doing.
Yeah, we decided not to show most of them in here because some of them are horrific. There's one that isn't as horrific, but it has an impact where they basically have a bunch of Africans in a front-leaning rest position while a Rhodesian soldier shoves a Browning high power in their faces, interrogating them, and that really tells you all you need to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And it shows the sort of strategic, apart from anything else, bankruptcy of the Rhodesian military at this point. Is all we can do is terrorize. And that leads us to the next slide, where KD, I think you have a little rant about counterinsurgency.
This is my counterinsurgency rant. Yeah, I've written about this before. About people who talk about coin, both NatSec weirdos and armchair generals alike, and it's whether or not they mention Rhodesia, and a lot of them will. During the peak years of Iraq and Afghanistan, where they were desperately trying to figure out how to win those wars, Rhodesia got seriously brought up as a study to learn from in positive ways.
Count the rings. Count the rings.
Like, and it's just like so many counterinsurgencies is an example where, sure, you might be able to win even overwhelmingly tactical victories, but you'll still lose. And the reason you'll lose, and my whole point of why I kind of say that counterinsurgency is effectively, I don't know if it's really truly a winnable war. I think the only cases in which you can really win a counterinsurgency are really interesting in sort of specific exceptions, because
you can make like some sort of like measured concession to it, like Northern Ireland. Maybe
you can't win. All you can do
North of Ireland
is you can stave off defeat, or you can lose. Maybe once in a while, in some freak instance, you can win, but the whole reason you can't really win as a counterinsurgent is because the reason that counterinsurgency starts is because there were political grievances with a significant, if not majority, of the population that they felt they could rectify through no means, that they had no avenues available to them peacefully to do anything to improve the situation or get the government to address it, and that they had no choice but to take up arms. And as long as those conditions exist, you're going to be fighting insurgency forever. You're not going to win. All you can do is not, lose or make concessions, in which that's effectively kind of losing, because you have to cede positions you could have just ceded without fighting to begin with. It's like Clausewitz, the tired saying in my field that got drummed in me to grad school is war is politics by other means, blah, blah. And that's more true with coin, because all the reasons that an insurgency starts are because of domestic politics that can't be taken care of peacefully. And all counterinsurgency throughout history is just people recycling the same attempts at doing counterinsurgency over and over, pretending like nobody's tried it before.
Maybe we should do terrorism. Maybe we should do niceness. Maybe we should patrol Lashkar and like berets.
And you see this here, Rhodesia, when they tried doing protected villages, which is basically just putting as many people as they can into effectively concentration camps.
People love that.
And the reason they do that, and they brought this up again in Afghanistan, because everyone likes to point to the Malayan emergency as a quote-unquote successful counterinsurgency.
Gerald Templer, one of the most fucking historically overhyped motherfuckers.
Mm-hmm. And the only reason that was quote-unquote successful was, one, they basically did concentration camps, and two, a lot of war crimes, including by the SAS, including the Rhodesian SAS, and two, it wasn't really a success because within 10 years, a new counterinsurgency started that went on for 20 and ended in a negotiated settlement in the 1980s. So it didn't really successfully win because they just started a new insurgency. And that's why I get a fucking vein in my forehead whenever someone talks about Malaya.
Hey, we should really make this one doctrine the focus of our entire military to the exclusion of everything
Surely
else.
nothing can go wrong.
That's right.
Well, it all went wrong.
You've just described an average day for me at the office. So yeah, I question whether counterinsurgency is ever truly winnable. I don't want to say it is completely, but I want to say it's very, very, very rarely, and 99% of the time, it is an unwinnable war.
Sort of
you should just fucking
unwinnable.
negotiate.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Excellent.
Next slide.
So we talked a little bit about Rhodesia becoming a pariah state, right? Well, we got to talk about international support for Rhodesia, which in this case is largely international white supremacist support for Rhodesia, right?
See our ad in Soldier of Fortune.
Soldier of Fortune was Rhodesia the magazine for a long time.
Cannot stress it enough that from when Soldier of Fortune started in like 1975, right up until the end of Rhodesia, it was effectively Rhodesia the magazine. There was not a single issue that did not have a fucking story about Rhodesia in it, that did not have full page ads recruiting for the Rhodesian security forces, which is interesting because, you know, trying to recruit these guys from overseas, it showed really how desperate the Rhodesians were. But even then, they still turned down a bunch of these guys, because even for the Rhodesians, a lot of these guys who were answering Soldier of Fortune ads were fucking insane.
Oh, yeah. And people talk a lot about American volunteers, of which there were some. The overwhelming number of foreign volunteers were British. There was an independent French company that was then dissolved for ill discipline, and a bunch of its members tried to do bank robberies in Salisbury before becoming mercenaries.
It just become it was a shower drain for some of the both weirdest and worst people in the world. Not just French mercenaries and white supremacists and KKK members, but also, interestingly enough, the Crown Prince of Albania, who, you know, he bounced around Europe for a bit after King Zog was kicked out of Albania. He got kicked out of
weird little Hearts of Iron reference events firing. You know,
yeah, he got kicked out of Spain for having mercenaries and illegal weapons. On his way to Rhodesia, he got basically ambushed at an airport, and I think it was Gabon by local like ruffians that had been hired by the Albanian government, and allegedly he scared them off with an RPG. He got to Rhodesia, where he had his own personal guard who had Albanian flags on Rhodesian brushstrike uniforms and like protected them. And eventually in the 90s, after the communist government fell, he returned to Albania for a referendum on restoring the monarchy, and he returned to the capital wearing a full Rhodesian military uniform.
Weird as shit.
Totally fucking, I love it. I love the idea of fail-sunning your way through Rhodesia only to return to fucking post-communist Albania, be like, everything's fine here. Shut up.
Yeah. He lost that referendum, by the way, handedly. He said that there was vote rigging. Maybe there was, but you know, I can't be asked to care.
Yeah, who cares?
Yeah.
And you can see the sort of general themes of Rhodesian external propaganda here, which is self-reliance, small country, anti-communism.
They've adopted the way of Juche.
Exactly.
I feel like some of these advertisements, this advertisement in particular, is very pessimistic. These women will die for Rhodesia. Not they
Inshallah.
might die. They will. You know, I feel like that's not. You're not selling this to me. Right.
Maybe the top right's like, "Mommy, can I go to Rhodesia?" Which just seems to suggest, yes, we will accept child soldiers.
Yeah, we'll take some child soldiers.
We're desperate, actually.
Why not give your kid Soldier of Fortune magazine? It's like Boy's Life for grown-ups.
Yeah, I plucked that one out of Soldier of Fortune. I mean, I cannot stress, like, Soldier of Fortune is half psychosis and then just half ads for guns. Admittedly cool ads because they're 80s retro ones.
Oh, it's a perfect Bible of FUD lore. It's like, actually, you need a 45 for stopping power.
If you read an issue of Soldier of Fortune from the late 70s or early 80s, you will 100% immediately understand, okay, I know now where QAnon and Trumpism and all this stuff came from. It just didn't have legs yet because the internet wasn't a thing.
Yeah, like the absolute Bircher stuff.
I want to know who LU was. What did he do? Political
probably
cartoonist
a newspaper cartoonist.
Political cartoonist for Soldier of Fortune magazine. That's a job description right there.
It's a Twitter bio for some of the worst people you've ever seen.
Soldier of Fortune. I mean, God, like between the ads and everything, they had the ad burned into my memory is one for what was called the Spotlight Freedom Tour. Spotlight being a weird, super right-wing newsletter that told you, quote unquote, the truth. And the Spotlight, quote unquote, Freedom Tour took you from Salisbury, Rhodesia to Johannesburg, South Africa, culminating in a nice trip to Rio de Janeiro in military junta era Brazil.
Nazi birthrights?
Yeah. So just birthright. Sorry. I went on it. I can say it.
Next slide, please, because we can talk about like all of this external propaganda differs a lot from Rhodesia's internal propaganda, the stuff they made for domestic consumption, which is breathtakingly racist, but not in the same way. It's racist in a sort of more patronizing way of can't we all just get along from a position of like patrician white supremacy.
Mm-hmm. It's almost lib. It's like lib white supremacy.
Yeah, like it talks about black Rhodesian soldiers, for instance, which Soldier of Fortune, you would be forgiven for thinking they didn't have any, where like they became an increasing part of the Rhodesian army every year. But you can also talk about these psyops here. I love the sort of the anti-work response here. Do not listen to people who try to stop you from going to work. They will make you lose money and jobs. If someone tries to stop you from going to work, go to the police or the army. But also the sort of the very patronizing stuff, like you cannot chase two impala. Follow the stronger, which gives you meat, work, education, freedom, hope, and safety. Its name is good government. The other impala leads you into darkness.
It reminds me strongly of like how, the American government, American government officials would speak to Native Americans in sort of this patronizing tone, which sort of infantilizing, and it sort of became the basis of how we think Native Americans talk. Well, no, they actually spoke normally. They still do today. But there was this sort of patronizing dialect that came from, Indian agents and stuff like that.
And this has that, but more British.
This has there's another great example of this, which is so the original Rhodesian PSYOP thing was if you go to one of these camps, you will be tortured, which was sometimes true, but not enough to make it like accurate. And so people would come back from these camps and not having been tortured, it would just discredit the whole propaganda. But so their last line of defense was to do more racism. And so I have a little passage here. They put these leaflets out in villages. Your tribal spirit has sent a message to say that your ancestral spirits are very dissatisfied with you. As a result of this, there has been no rain. Your crops have died, and there could be great famine. It is only the government which can help you, but you have to realize your obligation to help the government also.
This is what I'm saying, where they're just all counterinsurgency is recycling the same ideas over and over, because this is literally just like we did in Vietnam, where we had guys going through the jungle blasting recordings trying to make the Viet Cong it was their ghost.
Are mad at you, yeah.
Exactly. It's the counterinsurgency. It's just the same goddamn stuff reinvented over and over again with some general making it look like it's new and fresh so we can get a fucking promotion.
You have a tiny bit of liberal representational politics on the bottom left here with black power against the terrorists, where the text there says liberation movements claim they're fighting a freedom war against the white oppressors, yet most of the men in the front line are black.
By this point, that was true because the Rhodesians were so desperate they had massively expanded the army, and because of white emigration, they had to recruit more black soldiers. And honestly, like, I can't entirely begrudge a black man in Rhodesia joining the army at that point because, I mean, if you can't find a job elsewhere, what the fuck else are you going to do? So I can't entirely judge them.
Yeah, but it's still like explicitly a white supremacist power structure. The like elite units of the Rhodesian army remained all white until pretty much the end of the war.
Yeah.
Also, we got to talk about, next slide, please. We're getting there. The songs.
Oh, the fucking songs. Wow, can one small, unrecognized settler colonial state create so many fucking awful folk songs? And not just awful in that the songs themselves are awful, but awful in that they're awful in a catchy way, so they're going to be stuck in your brain forever. Like, I will have Rhodesians Never Die stuck in a part of my brain long after it is installed into a robot in like a container of some kind of liquid. It's all this emphasis on sort of that rugged individualism, us against the world, very traditional, very sort of conservative. And it's just all this weird internet fascist, white supremacist wet dream, which we'll circle back to. But some of these fucking songs, I mean, I have a few listed here. Rhodesians Never Die, The Last Word in Rhodesian, which is basically a love letter to Ian Smith. Green Leader, which is about a Rhodesian bombing raid that basically killed a huge amount of people. It's funny, these songs kind of go through the stages of grief. Because like you have the sort of you have the different stages of grief, which you see Rhodesia go through, and I'll talk about this, but
we're about to hit the bargaining stage here.
Exactly. Denial, they sort of like, oh, we're great, we got this, everything's fine. Anger, I think anger is expressed by the song called Another Hitler, which is basically the Rhodesians saying, Robert Mugabe is basically Hitler, and you're bad for not letting us do a settler colonialism. The last words of which are basically, this battle is not the last one, we are only stepping stones, and finally America will bleed. America will bleed. Which, if you didn't know it was a Rhodesian folk song, you would think it was like a nasheed or something from ISIS. But there's just so many fucking songs by people like Clem Folliott, John Edmund, and just more masturbatory material for guys on 4chan.
All right. Well, the good news is, next slide, please. The war ends.
Yes.
Hooray.
The war ends in a negotiated settlement in Britain. Zipra's big idea was to do a sort of big conventional last-minute Tet offensive sort of thing. Probably wouldn't have worked. Would have taken years anyway. Instead, what you get is this sort of very tenuous settlement of a country called Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, which is
that's the bargaining stage. Yeah,
sounds bad.
That's the you wouldn't hit a guy with glasses of white supremacy, which is
literal in this case, because you have the guy who was supposedly running it, which is Bishop Muzarewa on the right hand there. And the best way I could describe Zimbabwe Rhodesia was a Potemkin village of majority rule, where they tried to create the illusion that it was a majority ruled country, when effectively Smith and all his white cronies still effectively ran everything behind the scenes.
Yeah, Mugabe called Muzarewa a blacksmith, which was, a decent pun, if nothing else.
They were the only party that had not been outlawed by Smith at the start, because
they were the only guys.
They were the only ones who didn't condone violence, and two, they were the only ones who were not communists. They were like liberals, I think.
Yeah. But so eventually they have to sign the Lancaster House agreement, which it makes Margaret Thatcher sick. She grieves over this, right? But it is something that her government plays a part in overseeing, sort of against its will.
The Rhodesians were really hoping once Thatcher got in the office that might save him, but even they were too much for Margaret Thatcher, which should tell you a fucking lot. They were too much for Margaret Hilda Thatcher. So they're out of the bargaining phase. Now they're into acceptance, and they have no options left. They know they can't do anything left.
You have to have an actual election in which black people are allowed to vote.
Right.
Yeah, so they signed the Lancaster agreement. You have Mugabe here on the right. Lancaster.
I know it's Lancaster in England. I'm just being an asshole.
You have all the parties here, including this guy sort of in the back row, second from left, who looks a lot like, was it Mr. Wint or Mr. Kid from Diamonds Are Forever?
He really does. Shit. If God had meant man to fly, Mr. Wint, he would have given them wings.
And would not have had them do a settler colonialism.
That's right. So what they agree to is a British or Commonwealth militarily supervised election.
They effectively go back to being a colony. Then for 6 months they revert back to being the British colony of Southern Rhodesia, while the British administer elections under majority rule.
They kind of know that Mugabe's going to win. The Rhodesian military under this guy on the top right, General Peter Walls, consider doing a coup and killing Mugabe.
I will say there's a little bit of debate here about there's no question that these operations were planned. You had Operation Quartz, which is basically going to be an attack on that was going to be the effort to assassinate Robert Mugabe and leaders of ZANLA and ZANU-PF by rolling a bunch of tanks up to their election headquarters and then sending in the Rhodesian SAS. And then there was also, I might have these mixed up, there was Operation Hectic. One was an assassination attempt, and the other is they were basically going to attack all the guerrilla forces in their assembly areas, because part of the election thing was the British were going to get everyone into assembly areas where they could keep an eye on them while the election happened.
Yeah.
And it's questionable whether it was they were going to do it regardless, like if they were going to do it if Mugabe won, or if they seriously had deluded themselves into thinking that Muzarewa had a chance and Mugabe might try to quote-unquote steal the election and they were going to save it. But
it's also debatable to what extent Walls was like, either advocating these or preventing these. It's still very unclear.
In the end, though, it became elementary or sort of superfluous because Mugabe won so handedly. Like Muzarewa won like a handful of seats. Mukomo won the second most, but Mugabe and his party won an outright majority, like right away.
Yeah, landslides.
So even if they had wanted to do this, they sort of, one way or another, they realized this doesn't matter because Mugabe has won.
Although Mugabe does find out that the military has tried to kill him, and he does get more paranoid as a result of this.
Yeah, it's gonna happen. He's not happy when he finds out about this.
Let's blast through the next slide. We got a fine example of sign painting. Look at this queue.
Oh yeah, this I put in basically just for Alice because I knew she'd appreciate it. This is basically that armband and patch was for the Commonwealth Monitoring Force, which was all the British, Australian, and New Zealand other Commonwealth forces that were sent there to basically make sure the election went off without any shenanigans.
I love the sort of reversed Browning high power on a lanyard for that cross draw.
That's a rare late 70s British military fit. And obviously they had to have the Australians in on this because the Australians were the only military in the Commonwealth that had the infrastructure to ensure that every voter in Zimbabwe would be able to get an election day snag from Bunnings.
That's right, the democracy sausage. So Zimbabwe becomes a democracy. Mugabe is elected. Next slide, please. And what happens is that Robert Mugabe was for a long time considered sort of Mandela before Mandela, right? He had done the tour of like revolutionary and liberationist movements. He had been jailed by the British. He had met the ANC leaders in the 60s and become a Marxist. And, in terms of the way he spoke, in terms of the way that he wrote and promised to govern, was very liberal, right? Like a large part of sort of his initial program was, we're not going to kill all the white people. We are going to move forward together as a democracy. And, you do not have to leave Rhodesia. It's debatable to what extent Robert Mugabe became a tyrant versus was always a tyrant, right? He probably assassinated a lot of his internal factional enemies during the course of the Liberation War anyway. But he became worse over time. In part, there are a lot of like demobilized soldiers around after the end of the war, demobilized guerrillas who do what demobilized guerrillas always do, which is banditry. South Africa funds some of them just to stir shit up. There's a couple of revolts, especially of Ndebele people against Shona people. This is the Ntambani revolt, which is the still white officered Rhodesian army fighting for Mugabe against Zipro.
Yeah, the chief of defense staff for the Zimbabwe Defense Forces from 1980 independence to 1982 for about 2 years is still a white former Rhodesian security forces officer. Initially, it's Walls, and then Mugabe finds out about Operations Hectic and Quartz, and Walls has to make a very hasty departure to South Africa. But for another 2 years, the Zimbabwean military under Mugabe is run by a white Rhodesian dude, and they still have a lot of white Rhodesian dudes in the ranks who are fighting for Mugabe.
Yeah, essentially what happens next is a sort of combination genocide purge, where Mugabe
fan favorite.
Exactly.
We're getting you warmed up for Joe on this one, Liam.
Yeah, he eliminates all internal opposition. He humiliates white MPs and white army officers. sort of removes them from power, but also he perpetrates a genocide against Ndebele people called the Gakura Hundi. This leads to him forming his own sort of paramilitary power base called the 5th Brigade, which is largely trained by North Koreans. Weird vibes. Weird vibes. Next slide, please. As we get into post-war Rhodesia and the weirder vibes still.
God, that statue
is very strong North Korean vibes off that statue.
Yeah, because it was sculpted by North Koreans. That statue is pretty much direct from Pyongyang.
I both hate it and love it at the same time.
Yeah. So the way in which Mugabe governs Zimbabwe precipitates. It necessitates land reform, right? It necessitates taking farms away from white farmers, which is initially done on a sort of mutual consent basis, and then very rapidly not that, both as a way of securing power for Mugabe, but also as a way of bolstering the economy, which suffers very quickly from hyperinflation. You can see the $100 trillion note using the same font from the game Rock Band.
The wheelbarrows full of cash, a la the Weimar Republic.
Also Mugabe's sick jacket here.
Oh, it's incredible work.
Yeah.
The thing is, Mugabe is genuinely very popular with a lot of Zimbabweans at this point. Even still.
That's why when the coup d'etat happened back in 2017, the military had to phrase the coup, not that they were deposing Mugabe, but they were literally, we are getting rid of criminals around Mugabe that are misleading him.
Yeah, he's very tired and he has to lie down in his house.
Of course, it wasn't a coup because the nice general went on television to tell us it was not a coup in his military uniform, so it's not a coup.
Yeah, absolutely. So at this point, also, I should say that Mugabe's attitude to democracy is no longer liberal. There's one television ad for the elections, which I come back to, which is it's images of a car crash, and the tagline is, "This is one way to die, another is to vote for the opposition. Don't commit suicide, vote ZANU PF."
I kind of wish the Democrats would do more of that, though.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, the question is, do you have to hand it to Robert Mugabe, which is probably not. I tend to believe that he always had an authoritarian tendency. He was just better at camouflaging it. And he was, he liberated his country by the means that were expedient to him, and then centralized power totally.
Lived for fucking ever.
Became insanely corrupt also, which was a large problem. On the other hand, if anyone tells you there is a white genocide in Zimbabwe, they are lying.
Or South Africa. It's just not a thing. There's still
tens of thousands of white farmers.
There's still I think 60 or 70,000 white Zimbabweans in Zimbabwe. Oh, sorry, no, that number was too high. It's 28,000, but out of 300 something thousand, that's not an insignificant number that left behind. And in many ways, the those who are left are still very, closely connected into the economy, still quite privileged and all that. Yeah. So don't let them tell you that they're so fucking oppressed.
There's sort of, you have to balance what percentage of criticism of Mugabe's unarguable abuses is based in actual concern for the people of Zimbabwe, and to what extent is seething and coping from white supremacists who are mad that it's not them doing it anymore.
Yeah. And I mean, most of them didn't suffer. There wasn't a reconciliation the same way that was attempted, at least in South Africa. Most of these people did not suffer any consequences. Ian Smith lived out the rest of his days safe and happy in South Africa until he died in 2006 or 7. Again, he lived for a long fucking time. Yeah. Fucking asshole.
A lot of Rhodesians went to Britain or to South Africa or to Australia or to the US, and the key abiding factor about the Rhodesian, I don't even want to call it a diaspora, is that they never ever shut the fuck up about it. At this point in the 80s, British people of certain middle class circles talk about when-we's, expatriates from Rhodesia who constantly talk about when we lived in Rhodesia we had staff and we had a pool or whatever.
Staff sort of in quotes.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the postbellum Southerners saying, "Well, you should have seen that house before the wall."
Exactly.
It's lost cause shit. And that's what they say. That's why even during the war they were trying to do that. Like, oh no, this isn't about race. It's about communism. We're trying to prevent communism.
It's about race.
Well, also,
yeah, absolutely.
Part of the other thing about like the war ending in the Lancaster House Agreement is that it provides for a lost cause narrative in the same way that the end of the First World War did for Germany, which is, the army that never lost a battle but was defeated at a negotiating table
by the Jews.
Again, it's another Hitler's. You saw it in like that another Hitler song where they're basically blaming the British and the Americans and the Soviets and everyone else in the world for why won't you let us do a racism?
Yeah, and it's like the Rhodesian army never lost a battle is A, not true. They absolutely did. But B, doesn't matter. They still lost the war militarily.
Check the scoreboard.
Yeah. And
count the rings. You'll never beat Jordan. You're more Patrick Ewing.
White majority rule in Africa is now confined to razor wire circled suburbs of Cape Town and Johannesburg, all of them constantly driving themselves and each other completely insane through fear. It's an intriguing look into the future racial politics of the United States.
We're almost already there.
Yeah, we're getting there, bud.
You see that they're trying to sell. They got a new big truck out now. Some companies trying to market a consumer-oriented, quote, tactical urban vehicle.
You're going to be able to put flamethrowers on your car like you live in Johannesburg pretty soon.
I can't wait.
Cyclists.
It makes sense. They made the civilian Humvee. It only makes sense that eventually they have to make the civilian MRAP.
This is true.
Right. Incidentally, we do have to talk about whatever the opposite of a bromance is, which is that. So Robert Mugabe, I think we can say for very fair reasons, hated the British his entire life, but he also became more and more obsessive about it. Also about homosexuality. He thought all of his critics were secret homosexuals. But in particular, he really hated Tony Blair, and not necessarily for the right reasons.
Oh.
It was kind of mutual. Like, when he was prime minister, Blair talked up over, like, invading Zimbabwe and instituting regime change, overthrowing Mugabe by force, until the chief of the defense staff told him he would make everything worse, which I don't know why he didn't do this about Iraq, but
Tony Blair inadvertently just creating a footnote in history that'll eventually become a Hearts of Iron mod.
There's no oil in Zimbabwe.
They did eventually find some resources, which both the Chinese and the Russians are in Zimbabwe now, very aggressively trying to get.
Okay, that's the pivot to the east, yes. But so that leads you to the modern nation of Zimbabwe. Next slide, please. We're getting really, really close. My last couple of slides. We got to talk about Rhodesia as a locus for latter-day white supremacists.
Oh, sure.
Right? Because white supremacists love to have a legacy of being weird losers.
They love to be victims. It's just like white supremacists and sort of Christian fundamentalists. They love to be like, even though they're anything but, they love to seek out narratives where they are the victim.
Absolutely. And in particular, this kind of like stab in the back thing of the Rhodesian army was based, and they were Chads, and they wore the little shorts, and they kept winning, but they were betrayed, right? It's not the case, but
rings.
Yes.
It's just these fuckers and their victimhood complex ruining the FN foul for me forever.
Yeah, you see here Dylan Roof, a Charleston church mass murderer, wearing a pre-democracy apartheid South Africa flag and a Rhodesian flag. You've got a little "Make Zimbabwe Rhodesia" again, which makes the link with Trump nice and explicit.
And if you want to see any shit like this, like just go to the website, the Commando store with a K.
God damn it!
It just basically just makes its living off of people buying Rhodesian masturbatory material.
Absolutely. The K board of 4chan or of 8chan, whichever, is magical place indeed. Is sort of a repository for this particular kind of military history inflected white supremacism. Personally, when I get nostalgic for the military history of a country that no longer exists, it's the Soviet Union, because as we know, the Soviet Union, A, never did anything wrong, but B, B, existed for 80 years and created stuff other than overhyped bicycle shorts and racist tantrums.
And it was also actually
put a guy in space.
And it was also actually recognized by the rest of the world, including their principal adversary.
Yeah, so all I can say about Rhodesia is seize, cope. Next slide, please. My final slide. So much of this breathtakingly horny. This is a horrifying little vignette I made myself, which I think neatly summarizes the whole process. This is a white Rhodesian woman wearing an anti-emigration shirt, because this was like a popular thing in Rhodesia, was to try and like prevent white flight by saying, oh, well, we're staying to create our ethno-state. This was when it was really starting to hit the Rhodesian economy. Then we have a cropped and badly colorized version that got picked up on K, the firearms board. And then last of all, we have a lovingly, horrifyingly enhanced version to make her more trad looking.
Yeah, they had to make her face thinner, make the lips bigger.
She looks like Lana Del Rey. I found this on Tumblr.
Oh God! A cursor place that won't just die.
A Tumblr of fascist aesthetics.
Wow.
Fascists are desperately, weirdly horny. There are so many drawings of girls with big tits in Rhodesian military uniform.
Alice, there's a whole big bunch of listeners right now writing down in their little books reasons to cancel Alice. Goes on fascist aesthetic Tumblr boards.
I found it. I was looking for this, and I found it.
And I can say it's not just anime waifus. I can safely say, as a furry, there are plenty of horny, furry Rhodesian things too. All I can say to this is, it's not hard to be horny without being a fascist. I do it every day.
Going back in time and showing badly burned Ian Smith in hospital a drawing of like a serval in brushstroke uniform, so he dies of his wounds.
God, if only. And I didn't even notice at first. For some reason, my eye didn't catch it. That not only does she have that shirt and shit, she has a fucking, like, what I can only assume is a Browning high power and a holster there.
Again, making a very cool pistol uncool, but
they ruined all those things. Like,
so, this has been a brief potted history of Rhodesia. What have we learned?
Don't do a settler colonialism, or if you're gonna do it, don't let your colony have an army. Sorry, go ahead, Liam. I cut you.
Supremacist.
Yeah,
that too.
Maoism beats Soviet doctrine in how to run a counterinsurgency.
At least in a country that doesn't actually have a industrial urban peasantry to mobilize in the first place.
Yeah, what's one BTR to a bunch of guys with AKs?
Nkomo did have the awesome sort of swagger stick that he walked around with.
That's true. You know? Yeah. Anyway, bye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our next episode is on the Boston molasses disaster.
We can. You know what? No, we'll do that later.
Yeah. Next episode, hopefully featuring the other 3/4 of my voice.
Yeah, I hope so, bud. I hope
he'll be back from sabbatical by then.
Yeah, KD, thank you so much for coming on and for helping me with the slides.
Well, the people want more KD. Where can they find more KD?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me on to attempt this again during a period where no major historical events were happening at that moment in time. And second of all, if you want to hear me rant more about national security, you can find me at @war_takes on Twitter. I also have a blog where I write essays. That's just wartakes.com. And if you want to just see me shitpost or post furry art or do other bullshit, you can find me at KomodoDad on the twitter.com. And I think that's about it.
Hell yeah. That's a podcast. We did it. We finally got that.
Yeah.
Did a podcast.
All right.